President Trump imposing steep taxes
We'll be announcing some additional tariffs over the
on the country's three largest trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China.
China released its slew of countermeasures.
Am I going to impose tariffs on the European Union?
Then economies everywhere will face a big disruption, and Wall Street might find a lump of coal in its stocking.
Could kill 100,000 American jobs.
10% on pork, beef, soybeans, sorghum, fruits, vegetables, and dairy products.
That it ignites a global trade war.
Throughout history, no empire has reached greatness solely through the imposition of tariffs. Instead, true greatness stems from unfettered trade and global collaboration. The United States, during its zenith, championed a zero-tariff ideology, spearheading initiatives like GATT and the WTO to solidify its trade and financial dominance on the world stage. However, as the U.S. experiences signs of decline, the solution lies not in reverting to old models of protectionism, but in fostering internal balance and striving for technological advancement to reclaim its leadership role. Currently, American policies veer dangerously towards a misguided fixation on tariffs, continuing to mark the decline of what was once a formidable empire. President Trump's approach is fundamentally contradictory. He seeks to decrease government spending while also advocating for tariffs against China. This clash reveals a deeper misunderstanding. Tariffs inherently demand a larger government role and increased spending. To effectively address perceived threats from China, the U.S. should pivot towards collaboration with allies, maximizing existing resources for a coordinated response rather than undertaking an isolating strategy. The decision to confront China unilaterally fails to acknowledge the reality of U.S. influence, mistakenly expecting China to capitulate to American demands during negotiations. Such misplaced confidence echoes historical missteps, reminiscent of the coercive tactics employed with Japan, which have proven ineffective in deterring more complex negotiations. China's reluctance to engage stems from a belief that U.S. demands are both unreasonable and inconsistent. Pursuing negotiations that yield only empty rhetoric and publicity stunts serves no productive purpose. Engagements need to be sincere and meticulously planned. They cannot rely on hasty gatherings of leaders that yield little more than surface-level agreements. The advantageous position that the U.S. held in 2018 has undeniably shifted. Currently, aspirations of favorable negotiations must be grounded in reality rather than overblown expectations. Trump's erratic and often insincere foreign policy approach has been counterproductive, undermining the potential for meaningful dialogue. China's political landscape allows it to demand substantial talks only when there is tangible sincerity and visible efforts towards real progress, eschewing empty gestures in favor of authentic engagement. The current foreign policy bears striking similarities to Khrushchev's confrontations with the U.S. in the 1950s, characterized by domestic unrest and a failure to deliver concrete solutions to pressing American issues. The administration's approach has not generated significant accomplishments, particularly regarding the tumult in the Middle East. With military actions unlikely to yield favorable outcomes, the threat of broader conflicts looms, jeopardizing U.S. leadership and risking international humiliation. America's interventions in the Middle East, along with confrontations involving groups like Yemen's Houthis, risk exacerbating missteps that could lead to serious repercussions. Without a coherent strategy to navigate these conflicts, doubts regarding U.S. effectiveness will only grow. Observing how these situations unfold will undoubtedly test the resilience of American authority on the global stage.
Trump is prepping tariffs on potentially trillions of dollars.
on steel and aluminum, and that's at a 25% level.
It's set to begin on April 2nd.
European Union, China, Brazil, India, Mexico, and Canada.
Worth of goods from all around the world, practically everything that comes into the United States.
India charges us auto tariffs higher than 100%. China's average tariff on our products is twice, and South Korea's average tariff is 4 times higher.
April 2nd comes, that'll be reciprocal tariffs.
In the past couple of days, Trump made a rare statement suggesting that tariffs on China could be lifted. Is this something that was always open for negotiation, or is it a sign that China has struck a nerve? Some experts have closely analyzed the steps and content of Trump's tariff strategy and found that the devil is in the details. The truth behind Trump's tariff war is finally emerging, and the answer is quite surprising. Few people had truly considered this perspective. So, what is the real nature of Trump's aggressive tariff war? Let's begin by looking at three recent developments. First, on March 20th, U.S. Senator Steve Daines from Montana visited China. Daines is a key Republican figure who became the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee in 2023 with Trump's support. He is a close ally of Trump and a staunch supporter during his election campaign. He also represents one of the few agricultural states within Trump's inner circle. Second, on March 22nd, Russia's Sputnik news agency reported that when asked whether he might cancel the tariffs imposed on Chinese goods, Trump said, "We can talk about it," signaling an openness to negotiations. Third, on April 2nd, Trump announced reciprocal tariffs on the world. Countries around the globe are bracing for this moment, with many already preparing countermeasures. If the U.S. moves forward, a global trade war may become inevitable. Also worth noting, on March 21st, the U.S. Federal Reserve released its 2024 audit, revealing a staggering $77.6 billion operational loss, its second consecutive year of massive deficits, following a $114.5 billion loss in 2023. This not only reflects serious issues within the U.S. financial system and major challenges facing its economy, but also underscores the intensifying internal political conflict in America. So, why did Trump launch such an aggressive tariff war right from the start? The world has long speculated, and three main theories have emerged: to increase federal revenue and ease the U.S. fiscal crisis, to use tariffs as a bargaining tool to pressure other countries and restructure global trade, to protect domestic industries and drive manufacturing back to the U.S. While these explanations are reasonable, they don't touch on the deeper core of the issue. Now that the situation has evolved, let's explore the underlying logic and uncover the true intent behind Trump's tariffs. What is the essence of tariffs? This logic is a bit complex. Simply put, tariffs increase government revenue and benefit domestic producers, which helps related industries and employment. But they also raise consumer costs. In essence, tariffs are a trade-off between consumer interests and job creation. For example, imposing tariffs on a particular industry is like transferring some of the benefits that consumers would have enjoyed to producers and to the government. Some parties, like the government and producers, gain. Others, especially consumers, lose. Tariffs can protect specific industries and also serve as leverage in negotiations. In many cases, they enjoy broad public support, especially when framed as protecting national industries and jobs. This support tends to surge during economic downturns. Historically, the U.S. adopted aggressive protectionist policies during the Great Depression. And that's where the U.S. economy stands today, facing downturns, with certain industries weakening. Tariffs become a blunt, simple solution. Most developing countries maintain higher tariffs than developed nations, primarily to protect their key industries. This leads us to a critical question: which industries should be targeted with tariffs, and how should they be applied? Also, how might other countries retaliate, and how could they strike at America's vital points? These are now crucial strategic considerations. With this foundational logic in mind, we can better understand the specifics of Trump's tariff policy and his true motives. It's well known that U.S. elections hinge on 7 key swing states. Coincidentally, or not, these swing states are exactly the ones struggling economically, or even declining. Their major industries have a major impact on election outcomes. That's why Trump's first wave of tariffs specifically targeted industries critical to these swing states. For example, steel and aluminum are key industries in Pennsylvania, home to Pittsburgh, America's steel capital and a pivotal swing state in elections. In 2018, Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum, which clearly wasn't a coincidence. Similarly, the auto industry, another of Trump's heavy tariff targets, is the backbone of Michigan's economy. Detroit is known as the Motor City. But here comes the new twist. The reciprocal tariffs set to take effect on April 20th will apply on a much broader scale. Trump has declared that all goods will be subject to tariffs. What's the rationale? As we discussed, tariffs serve two main purposes: protecting key industries and acting as a negotiation tool. The so-called reciprocal tariffs strategy reflects this dual purpose. On one hand, the Trump administration will make strategic choices, favoring swing states, generally Republican red states, while hitting Democratic blue states. On the other hand, they'll aim to use tariffs as leverage in trade negotiations. So, Trump's aggressive tariff rhetoric closely aligns with his election strategy. Essentially, tariffs are being used as a political tool in a different form. In the end, nearly all of it points toward the 2026 midterm elections and even the 2028 presidential race.
Global trade again
Is applying a 25% tariff.
26 billion euros.
The 25% tax applies to all imports.
U.S. President Trump is shaking up global trade again.
Totally unnecessary and stupid.
In a dramatic escalation of transatlantic tensions, the European Union is poised to retaliate against President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum. As of March 12, 2025, the EU has unveiled plans to impose counter tariffs on a staggering 26 billion euros worth of U.S. goods. This looming trade war threatens to upend global markets and strain diplomatic relations between long-standing allies. The roots of this conflict trace back to early 2025 when President Trump announced a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports, citing national security concerns. This move sent shockwaves through international markets and drew swift condemnation from global trading partners. The EU, viewing these tariffs as unjustified and harmful, has been left with no choice but to respond in kind. The EU's countermeasures are both strategic and symbolic. The initial phase, set to take effect on April 1st, will reinstate tariffs originally imposed in response to Trump's first-term metal tariffs. These measures, valued at 4.5 billion euros, had been suspended in 2023 following negotiations with President Biden. The second phase, commencing April 13th, targets an additional 18 billion euros worth of U.S. industrial and agricultural goods, including steel, aluminum, home appliances, wood products, poultry, and beef. Notably, the EU's list includes products manufactured in key Republican voting states, aiming to exert political pressure on the U.S. administration. The stakes are monumental. European officials warn that these tariffs could have a fourfold impact compared to previous measures, potentially affecting hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions in trade. The European Commission has emphasized that while the EU prefers dialogue, it will not hesitate to defend its economic interests. President Trump, however, remains defiant. He has threatened further tariffs, including a potential 200% levy on European wines and spirits, should the EU proceed with its countermeasures. This tit-for-tat escalation raises fears of a full-blown trade war with global ramifications. The international community watches with bated breath as these economic titans clash. The potential fallout extends beyond the US and EU, threatening global supply chains and economic stability. Observers note that while the EU seeks to uphold the principles of free and fair trade, it must also navigate internal divisions and external pressures. The unity and resolve of the 27-member bloc are being put to the test as it confronts an unpredictable and assertive U.S. administration. As the April deadlines approach, the world braces for impact. Will cooler heads prevail, or are we on the precipice of an unprecedented economic showdown? The answers remain uncertain, but one thing is clear. The outcome of this dispute will shape international trade dynamics for years to come. What are your thoughts on this escalating trade conflict? Do you believe these tariffs will lead to a fairer trading system, or are they a step toward economic turmoil? Share your opinions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analyses of global political developments.
The biggest target of Trump's tariffs so far, though, has been China.
Donald Trump has doubled down on his threat of tariffs. Trade war between the US and China has just kicked off.
China released its slew of countermeasures, pretty extensive this time round compared to the previous round in February.
The US imposed new charges on goods imported from Canada, Mexico and China.
And economists are worried that we could be on the brink now of a real trade war between China and the US.
Rubio miscalculates U.S. leverage on China. Nullified, China halts imports, biggest winner emerges. Recently, Australian energy giant Woodside Energy announced a milestone long-term agreement with China Resources Gas Company. Starting in 2027, Woodside will supply approximately 600,000 metric tons of liquefied natural gas, LNG, annually to China for 15 years. This is Woodside's first independently signed long-term sales contract with a Chinese buyer. Under the agreement, LNG deliveries to China Resources Gas will begin in 2027. With with a stable annual supply of 600,000 metric tons for 15 years. This steady supply framework offers long-term security for optimizing China's energy structure, while opening up an important growth market for Australian LNG exports. In response to the U.S. imposing a 10% tariff on Chinese exports to the U.S., China announced it will impose retaliatory tariffs starting February 10, 2025, on certain goods originating from the U.S. This includes a 15% tariff on LNG imports. Bloomberg reported that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio claimed in January that LNG should be used as a bargaining chip in trade negotiations. However, China did not cooperate. This spells bad news for U.S. natural gas companies seeking contracts to kickstart new projects. In another report from January, Bloomberg noted that China's efforts to diversify its key energy supplies have shown results, and its push for energy self-reliance has hindered the kind of energy deals the Trump administration had hoped for. Data shows that U.S. LNG carriers have vanished from Chinese waters, with what used to be 400,000 tons of monthly imports dropping to zero, marking the longest interruption in China-U.S. LNG trade since June 2023. The difficulties for U.S. energy companies are becoming apparent. A Morgan Stanley report pointed out that the Chinese market accounts for 5.4% of U.S. LNG exports. Losing this key buyer could cost U.S. companies approximately $1.5 billion annually. Even more critically, Chinese buyers are reselling contracted U.S. LNG to Europe, further squeezing U.S. market share globally. In other words, U.S. LNG barely qualifies as a supporting role in China's energy portfolio. So, where does China's confidence come from? The answer lies in one word: diversification. In recent years, domestic natural gas production has steadily increased. In just the first 2 months of 2025, industrial-grade natural gas output in China rose 3.7% year-on-year. At the same time, pipeline gas from Russia and Central Asia has continued to increase, and combined with LNG supplies from Qatar and Australia, China has long shed its reliance on any single source. The proportion of seaborne LNG imports is gradually declining. Earlier this year, the U.S. Secretary of State tried to threaten China using LNG as a bargaining chip, but the tactic was clumsy at best. Currently, China's largest LNG import source is Australia, with 26.19 million tons imported in 2024 at a cost exceeding 100 billion yuan. Qatar ranked second with 18.34 million tons, and Russia third with 8.3 million tons. It's worth noting that this is the first time in many years that China has signed a 15-year energy supply agreement with Australia. After suspending imports of relevant U.S. energy, Australia, with its abundant resources, may receive even more orders. Back in 2021, under former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Australia blindly followed the U.S. lead in confronting China, which led to a collapse in China-Australia trade relations. Australian products like barley, beef, and wine were shut out of the Chinese market. Meanwhile, the U.S. rushed in to seize the Chinese market share left behind by Australia. But now, the tables have turned, and it's Australia's turn to sideline the U.S. It's well known that one major reason Morrison lost office was the deterioration of China-Australia relations under his leadership, which brought massive economic losses and domestic political pressure. Now, similar pressure is mounting on Donald Trump. However, some worry that China's halt on U.S. LNG purchases may sever ties between the world's largest LNG producer, the U.S., and its largest buyer, China, further intensifying trade disputes. Recently, the Chinese embassy in the U.S. made its position clear. No matter the type of conflict, China is fully prepared. If Trump insists on provoking friction, then China will match him step for step. Backing down would only embolden the U.S. to press harder and escalate further.